Is Web3 accessible?
That's such a good question. I mean, I guess the obvious answer has to be no. And I'm not even saying it from a perspective of, I'm saying that it in such a broad strokes perspective. I mean, like, the usability in the space is definitely not there. We're working on it, but I think we have a long way to go. So there are a ton of things that I think that make that statement not true. And I guess I would say, like, the top one, which I don't see enough people talking about, and I think we like to tell ourselves in a bear market that this isn't true, but I think it's true still, is just that, like, you need a pretty solid chunk of money to have fun on chain. Doesn't mean, like, you can't engage in crypto Twitter. Of course, you can do that. But, like, crypto doesn't really become fun until you have a few grand to play around with. And that's not accessible by any means. And I guess the alternative of that is, like, maybe it's fun to try to get to a couple grand, but still that's not appealing and accessible to everyone. So
from a visibility perspective and talking about inclusion in the space, would you say we need more platforms or programs like She256 with their kind of support structure? And what are other avenues to bring more diversity into the space? Because you talked a bit about how, meeting your mentors through the program really helped you, almost like a handheld into the space. And that was great for your journey, in the beginning. So yeah, if you have any thoughts on that, do we need more of that? And do we even have more of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think without a doubt, if I didn't have a mentor, I would not be where I am now. And if I didn't have Nick as my mentor at the time, I wouldn't be where I am now. And I'm forever grateful for that. I think it's really, really important in a space as complex and as much of a dark forest as crypto is, to have someone who can show you the ropes and help you understand how things work, how not to get rugged, like all of these things. And so to me, I think mentorship programs are deeply important. And I think the other piece here that I always try to keep in mind is, like, of course, when I think about diversity and inclusion in the space more broadly and what needs to happen to be a success, like, I'm speaking from a very privileged perspective of living in the United States. I have a ton of different identities that give me a lot of privilege when I move through the space. And so I think there are definitely, like, several layers to this. And I think there are a ton of people who have probably better perspectives on how we can bring in more diversity and inclusion more broadly. But the one thing that I will say, which is not a solution, but it is a point that I really like to, like, make sure I'm clear on when I talk about any of these things in crypto. There was a period of time, and I think a lot of people still hold the belief that anonymity effectively protects people from discrimination, right? So this idea that, like, oh, well, if someone doesn't know that you're a person of color, or someone who's not a cis white man, or like all these things, then, like, in theory, people shouldn't be able to discriminate against you. Couldn't be more incorrect. I really don't like when people use that logic. And the main reason is just that, like, being part of a group that is marginalized in crypto, just because we're building a new system doesn't mean that we're not sort of, what's the right word? Absorbing a lot of the existing structures that keep people from being able to engage, blah, blah, blah. So, like, an example of this that I love to use is, like, airdrops, right? Amazing thing. Love it. The problem, and I'm not saying it's a problem with airdrops, I'm just saying this happens, is that, like, if you don't have a bunch of money, getting airdropped something that's like $5,000 worth of a token, it doesn't make sense for you to keep that token. You're going to sell it. And so there are these really weird structures where I think in crypto, a lot of people design systems and forget that, like, there are existing structures that stop people from being able to either keep an airdrop or spend 10 hours a week contributing to a DAO that they're not getting paid for, or even these, like, simple nuances of, like, weird microaggressions, or what it means to have to, like, really stand up for yourself in terms of compensation, different groups are going to respond differently to that based on how they're socialized. So I think we need a ton of structures that help uplift people who are women, people of color, like all of these different groups, people in geographic areas that are not the US and Europe. But I think a lot of that is going to need to come from things like mentorship groups and other structures that do work on like uplifting, as opposed to sort of saying anonymity saves all, because that's very obviously not true.
And I think the thing about our current financial system is